So I think we're going to go back to Deb, who's going to finish up just a few slides, and then we'll hear from Jenny Kim on the language program.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. So just wanted to finish out what is part of Alexa and I's slides here to give you a look ahead on where we're going. So the 2018 end-to-end census test is our big next test and our final test before the 2020 census. And this is going to give us an opportunity to integrate major components and test them all working in a census timeline style environment. The test is currently planned for 3 locations covering approximately 771,000 housing units in Pierce County, Washington, Providence County, Rhode Island, and the Bluefield, Beckley, Oak Hill, West Virginia area. And their census day will be next April 1st. So I think this morning, John had talked about 34 operations. Well, here's our favorite operations slide, which I think you guys have probably seen before. There's 24 operations that are in scope for 2018. It's an end-to-end test there. They're in the dark and light purple. You'll notice the highlighted operations with the orange rings are things that are brand new to this test, and that includes update, enumerate, group quarters, data products and dissemination, redistricting data, and archiving. Looking ahead at key milestones for the test, you can see we're checking off our lists here as we move down through. The opening of our area census office was slightly delayed due to the build out of that office space, but that will not impact our overall schedule. And then looking ahead, you can see our production activities start in August with in-field address canvassing. And here I just wanted to change the conversation as I wrap up this segment of the presentation and do a promo and a shout out for the session that'll be tomorrow morning. I'd like to just acknowledge that the census, decennial census has experienced, as you're well aware, a persistent undercount of young children for several decades. And in 2013, a task force reviewed the available information on this issue and produced a report recommending a series of research projects that would leverage our existing resources, such as the data sets from 2010, the American Community Survey, and other sources. The report seen here was released in February of 2014, as is available on census.gov. And a research team here has been conducting several projects to try and answer key questions about why the census misses young children. This team began in May of 2015 to begin working on the recommended research from the task force. And here you can just see the numerous sources that they were taking advantage of as part of their work. And at the beginning of the year, we finalized and released the full reports on investigating the 2010 count of undercount of young children, and these can be found on our 2020 census webpage in the 2020 Census Memorandum Series. And here I'd just like to give a shout out to stay tuned for what I hope is a robust dialogue on this topic starting out tomorrow morning. And then in closing, before I kick over to Jenny on the language program, we always like to show a summary of some key milestones for the program. Here you can see a couple of things we'll worry about each year, even though there's a many couple of million of things we'll also worry about that are not on the slides. We're making great strides in progress. Certainly the completion of our 2017 census test is one of those. And I'm actually thank you for the great dialogue on the 17 test, as well as your interest in the program. So I think we're going to cut right to Jenny now, and then we'll do questions at the end if there's anything additional from the morning. Okay. So Jenny.
Thank you, Deb. Good morning. So at the last NAC meeting in the fall, you had an opportunity to hear a little bit about what we did in 2010 and what we have been doing with the language working group. And you provided valuable inputs through the NAC recommendations for the 2020 language program. So what I'm going to do today is, as I talk about some of our mid-decade activities, I'm going to be introducing some of our staff members who have been working on the language program, as well as share some of the innovative approaches that we are taking towards 2020 and share some examples of our non-English materials. The role of the 2020 language program is to first identify ways to reduce language barriers to enumeration, and then to determine the optimal level of support. And in optimizing the content of our non-language materials, it's very important that we go through a quality translation, review, and pre-testing process, and to ensure that our translations are meaningful. On the next slide, you will see what has been taking place during the decade. There we go, thank you. As you're all aware, in 2015, we established the NAC Language Working Group that we have been working with you over the last 2 years, and you have given us valuable input to our operations and helped strengthen and to reaffirm this important work that we're doing. And throughout the decade, we've been monitoring language trends and have deployed language strategies through various field tests, especially the 2016 Census test that served as our language testing vehicle. And all of these efforts have included pre-testing of our non-English materials through cognitive testing, usability testing, focus groups, extra review, etc. And in addition to these activities, during the decade, we have been consulting different federal agencies on their language operations. For example, the FBI, the State Department, Homeland Security. And one thing that we found out while we were touring different agencies, some of you may remember this language assistance guide, the language identification flashcard that we use during our field operations that has messages in 50 different languages. We learned that Homeland Security and FBI really loved this idea, and they adapted it into their operations as well. And if you go to lep.gov, you can see their flashcards online. So that was very interesting. They give us full credit for that work. Also, we've been having conversations with industry leaders and professionals through organizations such as American Translators Association, the Interagency Language Roundtable, and we also looked at different language resources that are available in other agencies that also have a wide reach of audiences, such as Social Security Administration, the IRS, and healthcare.gov. Okay, now a major recommendation that came out of 2010 was our need for a comprehensive research and our approach to translation. And I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide, please. Okay. And in response to this need for a comprehensive approach in our translation work, and also in partnership with the Census Bureau's Improving Operational Efficiencies Initiative, we created a brand new branch that would oversee all of the translation-related work across the board at the Census Bureau at the enterprise level. So in setting up this branch, we adopted industry best standards and practices into our work and hired a professional from the industry to join us in our work. Jason Kopp, who is behind me, can you just wait for a moment? Jason is our chief of the translation branch, and he comes to us from the State Department, where he managed translations at their Office of Language Services. He is a graduate of the Middlebury Institute of International Studies and has a master's in translation localization management. I had to practice and say that correctly. He was actually also recently invited by the American Translators Association to be part of their Government Division Leadership Council, and he is in his week 1 as a council member. Anna Silva, who is right next to Jason, she heads up our terminology research within the branch, and she comes to us with 20 years of translation experience, and she has been an adjunct faculty member at the Middlebury Institute. Now, focusing on the second part of the slide that you see there, in planning for 2020, we also took into account another major recommendation from 2010 that was to thoroughly pre-test all of our non-English materials. So accordingly, we began testing earlier in the decade this time and included all of our public use materials. And you saw through Alexa's demo today, the Spanish screens that you saw in the Internet Instrument, all of the content, all of the text that you saw, including the error messages and the help text, have been pre-tested before deployment. instrument. Now, Marisa Hotchkiss is the Chief of Content and Language, who is also sitting there in the audience. She heads up all of our pre-testing of our non-English materials, and she manages our multilingual research contract with RTI International. She is a veteran of the Census Bureau and has a wide range of experiences from the field, demographic analysis, ACS, and communications. And a little tidbit for you today is Jason's staff and Marisa's staff combined, they have capabilities in 7 different languages. So as a show-off, let me give you the languages that we have the capabilities in. We have English, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Russian, French, and Portuguese, all in-house with their expertise. Okay, in the next slide, in addition to the new translation branch and our enhanced multilingual research efforts, we're also introducing the use of technology in our translation approaches, specifically the use of translation memory software, which is commonly referred to as TM. And this is a computer program that's widely used in the translation industry, which we were introduced to during our conversations with different agencies and professionals. So what the TM does is it stores all of the previously translated terminology into a database. So when we are translating new documents, it populates the already translated terminology into our document, and then it identifies within that document what remains to be translated. So this really helps increase the consistency in terminology, not having to redo the work or retranslate, as well as cut the time and increase the quality and efficiency in our translation work. I am going to be sharing some screenshots of that software just in a moment, but I do want to mention that our use of TM is not to be confused with machine translation, such as Bing Translate or Google Translate, which automatically translates without any human intervention and often creates structural and grammatical errors. So in the next slide here, this is what the software looks like. So when we import the document that needs to be translated, the software will automatically display the original text on the left, and then the translated work will appear on the right side. And then it will allow for a side-by-side or a line-by-line view of the two texts. In the next slide, this is an example of if I were to have a document that had already been translated and the English text had been revised, so I just need to update the translated version. This software will automatically track the changes for the translator and then identify where the new translations need to occur. Once again, cutting our time spent on translations as well as increasing our consistency of our translated terms. In the next slide, you'll see here, this software also has the ability to search for specific terms that we have already translated. So in this example, I'm searching for the term respondents. So when I put that into the search tool, the software pulls up the list of cases where this term was previously translated, showing the English version on the left side, the translated version in the middle, and then it also gives me the names of the documents so that I can pull up that document and see it without having to search for it manually again. This capability also allows us to build a terminology list for each language, which we can share with different operations such as our field enumerators or communication staff, our partnership specialists, so then it gives us once again greater consistency in our terminology and with ease. So now that you've seen some of the innovations, let's take a look at some of the types of support that we're planning for 2020. In the next slide, what you're seeing here is the support that we provided in 2010 on the left side, and then our expanded approaches for 2020 on the right side, which have previously been discussed with the language working group. I'm going to focus your attention to the highlighted items on the right. So with the deployment of the Internet Instrument, we will be providing non-English versions of the Internet Instrument in more languages than we did for the 2010 questionnaires. And I believe there was a question earlier about how many languages that we're targeting. Right now, we're targeting to have approximately 10 non-English languages on the Internet Instrument. And this will be same for the Census Questionnaire Assistance. For the languages that are available on the Internet Instrument will also be available for our telephone operators. For people to have the non-English interviews, and this will be made available throughout the entire CQA operation. Our field information instrument will also have the bilingual capability in English and Spanish, and this is different from 2010 where it was English only. We're also going to be expanding on our language assistance guides, and we will have 2 different modes available in 2020, one through a video format, and then while we continue to provide the paper format as we did in 2010. Here are some screenshots of the non-English Internet Instrument that we used during, the next slide, please. You're seeing some screenshots of our non-English internet instrument that was used during the 2016 census test. On the left side, you see the Spanish version. On the right side, you see the Korean version. And in the middle, you can see the English version with the language drop-down menu. I do want to note that what you're seeing here is the platform that we use for the 2016 test, and it's different from the eCase platform that we'll be using for 2020, but it captures the same idea of having multiple language options and the same look and feel across languages. In the next slide, you'll see information about our census question assistance. Once again, it will have available the same languages that we have on the internet. And in the mailing packages, we will have what we call the CQA insert that you see on the right side that will direct them to the specific language lines. And the message is very simple and has it written in the different supported languages. This is an example from the 2017 test, the CQA insert. And each of the languages have their unique lines, and also with Chinese, the Mandarin, and the Cantonese lines will be separate. Okay, on the next slide, I'm going to turn to the two types of the language assistance guides that we're going to have. So in 2010, we had the language assistance guides that had the look and feel of the paper questionnaire with information on the sides on the content of the questions. This time we're going to have the video version with introduction of the internet questionnaire. We're going to have a video language assistance guide that's going to walk our respondents through getting through the internet questionnaire. And then this will also be done through narration and closed captioning in the supported languages. And this will also include American Sign Language. And this will be readily available on the internet and at different partnership events, etc. On the next slide, you'll see that we will continue to provide our language assist guides on paper, and this will be for the same languages that are available through the video guides, but also include Braille and large print. And these printed copies will be available as well as PDFs on the internet. Okay, going to my last slide. As I close here, I'd like to draw your attention to some reference materials. In 2016, we issued the detailed operational plan for the 2020 Language Services operation, which is available online. And later this calendar year, we'll be finalizing our plans for the 2020 language program. And we'll be taking into consideration our current language data, the projection of the language needs going towards 2020, the recommendations that you have given us, as well as our mid-decade research findings and lessons learned. And I'd like to note that our journey in planning for the 2020 language program really dates back to 2010 when we were gathering lessons learned at the end of the 2010 operations and compiling recommendations for 2020. And I am personally thrilled to be on this side of the decade where we are seeing these recommendations come into manifestation. We still do have a lot of work ahead of us, but I do want to take a moment to acknowledge all the work that has already been done and all the research that went into it. And I also would like to thank our NAC members for partnering with us, and especially for those of you who are on the language working group for your time. And I look forward to having continual conversations with you as we finalize our plans and into implementation towards 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I had just a quick question. So thank you for all the work on that. I know I've been on that. This committee's been going a long time. So you're confirming that there will be 10 languages that will be online as well as and the telephone questionnaire
Yes,
assistance
right now we're
centers?
planning for 10 languages for the internet and the census questionnaire assistance.
Okay, so here's kind of probably a dumb question, but if I go online and I'm not one of those 10 questions, my gut would be like, oh, Google Translate. Will they be like, you can't do that? Because I know with Google Translate, there's probably some privacy issues. Like, are they locked out from that? Because I think people will try.
So from the Bureau perspective, we do not use Google Translate, and the reason why...
Well, I mean, as a user, if I'm online and I want to.
Yeah, so we can't stop a user from going on our website and copying and pasting into Google Translate and doing what they need to do. However, what we are going to do is we're going to, another lesson learned from 2010 was that the dissemination of this information, having the language assistance guides available in 60 different languages in 2010, and what we're going towards as for 2020 as well, we want to find different ways of disseminating this information information and making it a lot more clear on our website that these options are available. So hopefully, as we engineer our 2020 census website, that we will have more clear directions for our LAP respondents to click on those information where they will be able to click on the language assistance guides, either watch it through the video or be able to download the paper guide as well. In 2010, we had our partnership specialist with capabilities up to, I believe, 145 languages. So we're really going to be leveraging our partnership specialists also to get that information out, as well as through our communications campaign. What we're going to do with our videos is we're going to make this very accessible online. So when we have partnership events and different community events, we're going to make these videos available so they can play it. We're also going to have these language assistance guides that will be in segments. So there will be one huge segment that will talk about the actual content of the questionnaire, why we ask these questions. But in the beginning part of it, we're going to talk about why is the census important, some more of the one-on-one information on the benefits to the community in participating. So we will have that information where we can have different segments available. So for example, in we don't know exactly how long the video will be, but if they choose to only play a certain segment of the video for that pertaining audience, that they'll be able to do that.
And so you can do them like little applets. So say John wants to put something on his website in language, his web guy can come take it, put it in on his website.
Yeah, you can just link it to that video and be able to play it, absolutely.
Okay, great. I know Luke had a question, and then Taiku.
Hi, good morning, Jen, and thank you so much. Question, so I hear you saying as far as the languages that you'll have on the test and on the website, what about those dialects where the population may not speak the official language? And for example, what comes to mind for me is like Haitian Creole. There are folks who are of Haitian descent who speak Haitian Creole but may not speak French or may not read the French language. And so what's the strategy or plan to capture those folks and ensure that they're being given an opportunity to respond?
Sure. So I think there are different components of the question that you're asking. So hopefully in my perhaps a long answer, it might tackle what you're asking for is, first of all, in terms of the language selection, we are looking at all of the needs at the national level of the largest language groups that have a need in those languages. But you're absolutely right, as we drill down, so we have been monitoring the languages since 2010, looking at the ACS, the 2010 data, and then the ACS 1-year and 5-year estimates, and looking at trends and how they have been changing over time. And we are very cognizant of the fact that there are languages that are more of the languages in numbers of prominence of need. However, there are different languages that have different dialect needs, as well as languages that are of limited diffusion. And those are some of the things that we're tackling right now, looking at our list and looking at one language, how do we best capture the audience of that need using a certain dialect that may work for that population. That is part of the ongoing research that we have right now. Looking at the language selection for the language assistance guides in 2010, we had come up with lists of about 60 languages initially, and having gone back to our translators, there were certain languages that were very tricky to translate, or there weren't translators available within the United States to get the quality translations out, where we worked with different community members, and there were some languages that had to be deleted because of that unavailability, and then adding other languages where we got community input. So that's something that we're going to partner with, I think, at the community level as well. And I know, Carolyn, we have talked about other languages where we can really tap into some of your networks and be able to have these conversations. So that might be more of a general answer to your question. Does that answer where you're coming at? Okay. Yeah, and actually Haitian Creole is one of the languages that we are seeing in the top list right now.
Great. I have Taiku, and then Alasu, and then Maile.
Thank you for your work on this. Luke asked my first question. My second question is if you could share how you are going to decide which languages get into this list of 10, and in particular, I can imagine if you rank order different language groups, you could do it in two ways. One is by the percent of each language group that is not English proficient, and the other is by the total number of people in each language group that is not English proficient? And if you could just shed a bit of light into that. Thank you.
Yes. So in the selection of the languages for 2010 was that it was taken at the need at the national level. And the approach that we're going to take for 2020 is to take a national approach as well as a regional approach. So in terms of the internet instrument and the CQA support that we'll have, we are looking at our 5-year estimates and 1-year estimates from the ACS data and looking at the largest groups that have the need and taking that and making the internet questionnaire available. However, for our language assistance guides, what we're going to do is we're going to compile a list of languages at different levels. So at the national level, and then also looking at 6 different census regions and looking at a regional level, and then also at the state level. And we want to, we're going to cross-reference and compare the list that we have. So for example, if we look at the list of the 60 languages from our national level, yet we see top languages in different states or within our regions that are missing, we're going to add that as well. And also, you have given us recommendations previously about incorporating more of the AIN languages. We're already working with Dee Alexander, our Tribal Affairs Coordinator, and her staff in identifying additional AIN languages that may not appear on our list and look for the best ways to support those languages. And that's where we are right now, and the research that we are in the phase that we're in leading up to our final plans that will list all of the languages that have been selected probably by the end of this calendar year. Does that answer your question?
I guess sort of, but it sounds like when I look at the final list of 10, it'll primarily be populated by groups in terms of the number of people that are going to miss a chance to do the online self-administration rather than the percentage for any particular group. So, for example, a group like Hmong Americans where you can expect a high percentage of that group to be limited English proficient, but as a group they make up a small number of the total, are not likely to be in the top 10. That's my...
Yeah, so the language criteria for 2010 was looking at numbers of housing units that had the language need, and I believe the cutoff was about, I believe at 140,000 housing units or above. What we're going to do for 2020 is lower that threshold. So we will be looking at the total number of housing units that have a language need, but we will be lowering the threshold, probably looking at approximately maybe 60 or 70,000 housing units. So we will have a wider net this time in 2020.
Alasu?
Jenny, I wanted to ask for NERFU whether you're considering any kind of software to help the enumerator communicate in the field. We've been testing the language card now in some focus groups and seeing that that's one of the things that some of the different language groups are bringing up themselves. Well, in this day and age, you've got to have some way to communicate, or for the enumerator to call a language line once they establish what the language is, and they can do it right then with the person at the doorstep. And in terms of the language card, one of the things that we're hearing is some of the monolinguals' frustration with the fact that the language on the side, the name of the language, which I realize is mostly for the interviewer to know what language it is, it appears in English. So they raise, well, if it says Russian in English and in English letters, in the Roman alphabet, then that's not as helpful as if it said it in Cyrillic. So.
Okay, so let me go backwards in the question. So let's go tackle the language identification flashcard. Are you talking about where we have the label of each of the languages of that not written in that language? So I have the ID card from 2010. We actually have it written in English and in that language as well, and that's available. And I know I can bring this over to you in a little bit, is that we have the statements written in each of those languages and the name of the language listed in English, but then it's written in that language on top with English at the bottom.
Okay, the cards that we've been using most recently did not have it.
let's compare what's been used, and we will definitely tackle that. And then your first question was about NERFU operation, what we are planning for that. So our current plan right now is to have the NERFU instrument. As the enumerator questionnaire in 2010 only had English, and then the enumerators were given a job aid to aid them in conducting their interviews if they were in a situation where they would have to conduct it in Spanish. We are making that enumerator instrument completely bilingual in English and in Spanish, so all of the text that the enumerator would see and that would communicate to the respondents would be available in Spanish. Going back to what I talked about with the technology that we'll be using, one of the things that that we'll do is, because we will be creating language assistance guides in 60 different languages, we will have gone through translation review and pre-testing of these materials, and that will be all part of our software, which will create a term base. So all of the terms that we use in the language assistance guide that talks about the content of the questionnaire and our census operation, we will be able to pull term bases, term lists for each of those languages. And what we are looking to do right now is to create those reference dictionaries and make it available to our enumerators. We will make them available through their training. That's what we're planning right now. And then also when we hear that there are certain regions or certain locations where a language is more predominant, then we can provide that to our specialists out there as well. And once again, that's really going to help us have good terminology and good words that our staff use. We can't completely control for someone just interpreting on the fly. We can't be there at all times to control that process. But if we can give them the tool to use the terms that are appropriate and the terms that have been tested, this will really help our efficiency in the field, and as well as our partnership specialists. Thank you.
So Miley, and then we're going to go to James on the phone, and then Yolande, and then Desi, did you have a question too? Okay.
Thank you for your presentation, Jennifer. I just wanted to, I don't know 100% if Dr. Lee's point was made or was answered the way he satisfactorily. So I just want to kind of ask it again. What is Miley going to ask this time? But the question of it is there's been sort of a consistent feeling about the way that the census is done, is that the largest groups and the largest populations get represented. And from what I've always understood by being on the NAC, work that Nicholas Jones has done and other amazing members of the team have really made it clear to us that the census is about making sure everyone gets counted, not about putting the priority groups who are larger in representation up forward, because they're the ones who can afford to miss a few people. So I think the idea of focusing on, well, we have more people in this language group, therefore we're going to make that language be the one that's most available, really does leave out those small groups, those hard to count, those who go uncounted. So I guess that's sort of my preface to the next question, which is, you mentioned that you would be putting language in front of the different language questionnaire options, explaining the benefits of participating in the census, and that would be in language. And I'm just wondering if the work that you're doing in order to create that wording and language around that is taking into consideration the work that the hard to count group did in identifying why some of our populations don't actually want to be counted, as well as the work of the folks in the communications groups that are trying to reach our communities. I'm just wondering what consistency in that language, because for our communities who aren't really happy with the way that things have gone down in the past, the language to explain you should participate in my native language, which was Hawaiian, needs to be done that reaches people who may not want to participate in the census in the first place. And I need to know that the work that's being done is being done in a coordinated fashion, so that hard to count language access and the way that the wording is coming out to reach our communities is really going to get those folks who are not participating because they don't want to, or they're afraid to, or they're just invisible. And so I'm just hoping that we're not playing a numbers game and really about trying to count people who are not being counted. Thank you.
Thank you. So a quick response to that is let me talk about the part about the collaboration. How are we going to message? So even with the English script of what we would have, for example, on the language assistance guides, we're always looking for translations that are meaningful to the community. So it's not always a literal translation, but it's a meaningful translation. That's something that we have been talking about since 2010, making that into our goal. And we have a sub-team within our language support group that has been looking at just this issue of creating these language assistance guides. And we have been a huge partner of that is our integrated partnerships and communications team members who are part of this effort. And we have we met with the communications campaign staff recently to talk about these issues and how we can better partner with the work that they're doing and the audiences that they will be reaching together with us. And we are going to be putting a team together that will meet on probably a monthly or regular basis to pan out these issues. So your recommendations are very well taken and something that we will continue to work on. In terms of the reaching the language groups, that's where we come in with having departed from our national list that we have used at the national level in 2010 and really taking more of a regional approach and the local approach when it especially comes to language assistance guides. And I believe that once we have compiled the list of the languages for the assistance guides, it will not just be at the national need of all of the largest language groups, but we will take into consideration once again of different smaller language groups that will be represented in this list. Obviously, I don't have that list with me, and that's something that we are continuing to look at and something that we're going to have available towards the end of the year. But we definitely welcome your continual recommendation and feedback as we compile this list.
Let me, I can't emphasize, though, something that you were saying, Miley, and that is it's going to take more than having something on a government website to get members of various communities to respond and be counted to the census. And so that's where, I mean, we're going to have to take those materials and get them to someone who can talk to directly, someone that they trust, to get them to respond, which is why our partnership program is really going to be the program that is going to utilize some of these materials, but that's going to have to be the one that gets parts of our population to be counted, because I just can't see people looking at a government website and say, yeah, it's the government, I trust them. It's going to take more than us saying it. It's going to take some partners saying it as well. And I know you'll help us find some good partners in Hawaii.
Great. Operator, James was on the phone and had a question for Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer. First of all, I wanted to thank you and your staff for all the work that you're doing on the language issues because it's so important. I know we talked about this a little bit in the fall meeting, and since the fall NAC meeting, we've actually had the Section 203 determinations come out in December. That showed that there were just under 400,000 limited English proficient American Indians that were in jurisdictions that were covered for AIAN languages. And I think one of the things that kind of highlights when you're focusing on the top 10 languages is that even the most widely spoken native language, Navajo, won't be able to meet that criteria. And so I appreciate the fact that you're going to be taking alternative steps to address that. What I would really suggest, because we've done a lot of work with LEP, Alaska Natives in particular, what seems to work most effectively is if we can have some outreach materials that are tailored in the language that just basically gets the information out about, that there's going to be a census. It's important that you participate, and even providing identification like a blank for whoever the local coordinators will be. But then the other thing, because I know much of your discussion has been focused on internet resources, obviously there's such a low broadband penetration in Indian country that most of what we're really going to be focused on in terms of participation among American Indians and Alaska Natives is going to be the direct conversations that enumerators have. And so what I would strongly suggest with that is the Native American Voting Rights Coalition already has put together translation panels that it's working with in Alaska for many of the Alaska Native languages, and we're doing the same in some of the southwestern states, including Arizona and New Mexico, for Navajo, Hopi, Tohono O'odham, and so forth. What I would suggest is maybe having your folks connect with us about that. And what really will be necessary is to have the instructions that the enumerators use to to have that information translated in a way that's understandable to the American Indian and Alaska Native respondents. I think it ends up being a little bit less of a burden in the sense that for most of the American Indian and Alaska Native languages, you're not going to have to translate everything, but it's going to be really, really important that the instructions and the direct contact that the enumerators have with the respondents, that they're getting complete, accurate, and uniform translation so that are understandable to the community.
Thank you very much for that comment. We welcome this collaboration and getting connected to the different entities that can help us reach out to these communities. So I would love to have a follow-up conversation and connect with you on this. And thank you for your recommendation that you brought up at the last meeting about using the Section 203. We have been, you're absolutely right, the new one was issued in December of 2016, and we have looked at it, and it lists all of the language minority groups by state and by the district, and this really helped us compare the list of languages that we have been looking at through the ACS list that we have been keeping. And one thing that I do want to note is the languages that are listed in the Section 203 are actually based on the same data set that we look at for the language program, which are the ACS estimates. One limitation that we saw with the Section 203 languages is that it lists the languages of the need of the people who are eligible to vote. So people over a certain age, as well as their eligibility in voting. So that could, just looking at that list alone would exclude other individuals who may be in language need. But we did look at it, and we appreciate, especially the AIN languages that were listed. We saw that Navajo was one of the languages that we created the language assistance guides for, but obviously there are many other languages that were listed in Section 203 that we're looking at and looking for greater collaboration to see how we can reach out to these communities further. So thank you so much.
Great. I just want to do a reminder to the committee that, and James on the phone, if you have a recommendation, we want to make sure we capture it. So go ahead and mail it to chairnac@gmail.com so we can make sure we get that. Yolanda?
Hi, thank you. I also wanted to, I had mentioned earlier that the National Center for State Courts has a language committee that has been in place probably for 20 years. And all of the state courts are involved because if in the state courts you have to report out, and people with limited language proficiency have to have translators when they go to court. So New Jersey, for example, had such a unit starting in 1985, and we track language translations in New Jersey. So you might want to contact the National Center for State Courts. New Jersey itself has 40 staff translators, and we also have standards for using telephone interpretation, which is limited to 30, no longer than 30 minutes. We do not have standards in terms of testing for telephone interpreters, but I'll be happy to send you information on what New Jersey standards are, which the National Center for State Courts has adopted. So if you don't have that information, I can give you the National Center for State Courts, who's looking at all 50 state court systems.
Thank you so much, and I hope my staff are taking notes on the sources that you have sharing with us, and we will definitely follow up and come up with the list, comprehensive list of the suggestions that you have in different organizations and different sources that we can use. One comment that I wanted to make about the number of languages is also, yes, this is based on the numbers of the needs that we see at the housing unit level, but also when we have looked at the languages, so for example, in 2010, we had our language assistance guides cut off at 2,000 housing units and above that received language assistance guides. We started looking at the list, and there are languages that are of limited diffusion where we are going to have to do further work, where there aren't there aren't as much of the standards and the resources and where we can follow in terms of having quality translations. So having organizations like this and us partnering with their resources is really going to help us, especially tackle those smaller, the languages of the smaller communities in order to get quality translation. What we want to do for 2020 is not only have the non-English materials available, but make sure that the materials are translated in a quality format, and that there would not be any offensive language or any kind of wrong terminology. And that's another reason why we are really honing in on this technology, to make sure that we are going to use consistent terminology that's not only accurate but also meaningful and culturally sensitive and appropriate.
Great. We're going to take Hassan and then Taiku, and then we probably should break for lunch. And the photo first. I see.
Jennifer, thank you. And very quickly, I know you spoke about accommodations for vision impaired. Can you speak to hearing impaired? And are there any accommodations, especially when it comes to phone follow-ups?
Sure. So we are going to have our videos available in American Sign Language for that group. We looked at different ways of communicating information to those populations. And what we have seen is that in addition to having the guides in the sign language, would help from our perspective through our partnership efforts and through our field interpreters who have the capability to be able to communicate with those individuals more than what we would make available outside of the language assistance guides in the American Sign Language. We are definitely looking into that and what those capabilities would look like. And then we also made a mention about having obviously the large print guides as well as our Braille guides that will be available for 2020. And also all of the materials that we will have on the internet will be clearly 508 compliant.
And lastly,
Up again, circling back to Maile's comments. So if I understand you right, the 10 non-English languages that the questionnaire is translated to, the exact languages may vary by geography depending on what the language needs are.
Okay, so I will make a more clear delineation. With the internet instrument, the top 10 languages that we will have, we'll be looking at the national level, the number of housing units that have identified a language need. So for example, right now, based on what I have, the 2015 ACS 5-year estimates, the number of housing units that are in need in Spanish is roughly 3.2 million. And then going down to about our 10th, I believe, about maybe Polish, which is 68,900 roughly. So we're looking at the counts of the housing units across the board at the national level and the language groups, the language needs that have the highest number of housing units that have this need. Outside of that, that's the internet questionnaires. Outside of that, we will have many more language assistance guides in which we're going to pull the information not just from the national list, but also regional at the state level as well.
Okay, well, then I'll just register a comment, which I will write up as a recommendation for the committee. It just seems like for the internet self-response questionnaire, the marginal cost of translating more languages seems to be minimal compared to, the likelihood of people not being able to respond through, this medium and then having to expend other kinds of resources to catch them on the back end. And it seems like the internet is a perfect platform to have more than 10 languages, and I'm not clear what's so magical about the number 10. And I'll write that up. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jenny. So we're getting ready to move into lunch, but before we do that, we'd like for all the members to follow the photographer to a large display unit just outside of the auditorium where we'll take a picture. And while you're doing that, we're going to place the lunches out for folks who've traveled and who have ordered lunch. I'm told that we do have enough extras for local folks, so if you choose, there will be some extras over there that you can devour, should you choose, or you can, of course, go to the cafeteria. So let's do the group photo. Thank you.